Captain Dong-Sik Kim stared out the viewport of the transport ship as Kepler Station came into view. The massive structure floated in the darkness of space like a metal city. Lights blinked across its surface in patterns he could not understand. The station was bigger than anything he had ever seen. It made Earth's largest space stations look like toys. "First time seeing something this big?" asked Lieutenant Haewon Park from beside him. She was looking at a tablet filled with information about the other species they would meet. "Yes," Dong-Sik replied. "Hard to believe aliens built this." The transport ship docked with a soft bump. Other ships were already there. Some looked like metal boxes with engines. Others had strange curves and colors that hurt to look at. Each ship carried a warrior from a different world. Dong-Sik picked up his gear bag. Inside were his combat armor and weapons. Earth's best scientists had worked on them for months. Still, he wondered if human technology would be enough. They walked through the airlock into Kepler Station. The corridor was wide enough for 10 people to walk side by side. The walls were made of some kind of blue metal that seemed to glow softly. Strange writing covered the surfaces in languages Dong-Sik had never seen. "Stay close," Haewon said. "The air is safe to breathe, but everything else is unknown." They followed signs written in basic symbols toward the main hall. Other beings walked the same path. Dong-Sik tried not to stare, but it was impossible not to look. A creature made of what looked like living rock walked past them. Each step made small cracks in the floor. Its eyes glowed red like burning coals. Behind it came something that looked like a giant insect walking on 2 legs. Its shell was black and shiny like oil. "That's a Vorthak," Haewon whispered, pointing at the rock creature. "Their bodies are harder than diamonds. The insect thing is a chithan. They can lift 50 times their own weight." Dong-Sik nodded but said nothing. He was a soldier. He had fought in 3 wars on Mars, but those enemies had been human. These creatures were something else entirely. The main hall opened up before them like a vast cave. The ceiling was so high that clouds formed near the top. Thousands of beings filled the space. Some sat in groups based on their species. Others stood alone. In the center of the hall was a raised platform. A being that looked like a tree made of silver stood there. Its voice echoed through the space without any visible speakers. "Welcome, warriors of the galaxy," the tree being said. "You have come to settle the disputes of your people through honorable combat. The rules are ancient and simple. 1 warrior from each species. Single combat. No weapons beyond what your body can carry. Victory brings your people trade rights and territory. Defeat brings nothing." Dong-Sik felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. Earth's colonies on the edge of known space needed resources. Food supplies were running low. If he failed here, people would die. The tree being continued speaking. "This tournament has kept peace in the galaxy for 1,000 years. Better that 1 warrior should fall than millions should die in war." Around the hall, warriors from different worlds sized each other up. Some were huge and covered in natural armor. Others were small but moved with deadly grace. A few looked almost human, but their eyes held intelligence that seemed far older than Earth itself. "There." Haewon pointed to a group near the far wall. "Those are the Cathari." Dong-Sik looked where she pointed. 3 figures stood in the shadows. They were roughly human-sized but seemed to bend light around them. Even looking directly at them, it was hard to make out details. They moved like liquid darkness. "They've won the tournament 3 times in a row," Haewon said quietly. "No one has ever beaten their champion in single combat." "What makes them so dangerous?" Dong-Sik asked. "They can step through shadows like doorways. They move faster than the eye can follow. Some say they can drain life energy with a touch." Haewon paused. "Most species just give them whatever they want rather than face them in combat." The tree being raised what might have been arms. "The tournament begins tomorrow. Tonight you may speak with other warriors if you choose. Learn their strength. Understand their weakness. But remember, only 1 species can claim victory." The crowd began to break up into smaller groups. Warriors from the same region of space gathered together. Others remained alone, studying potential opponents. A massive creature approached Dong-Sik and Haewon. It stood 3 meters tall and was covered in thick gray hide. 4 arms ending in hands the size of dinner plates hung at its sides. 2 small eyes looked down at them. "You are the human," it said in rough but understandable words. "I am Gorth of the Bruthen people. We may face each other tomorrow." Dong-Sik looked up at the giant. "Maybe we will. I have heard humans are weak. Soft bodies, no natural weapons." Gorth flexed one massive hand. The sound of knuckles cracking echoed like breaking wood. "I will try to make your death quick." "I appreciate the thought," Dongsik replied calmly. Gorth seemed confused by this response. He had expected fear or anger. When neither came, he turned and walked away, shaking his massive head. "You handled that well," Haiwan said. "He's big and strong," Dongsik replied, "but he moves like he's underwater. Speed beats strength if you use it right." They found quarters assigned to the human delegation. The room was larger than needed, but comfortable. Earth furniture had been brought ahead of time. It felt strange to see a human bed and chairs surrounded by alien architecture. That night, Dongsik lay awake thinking about tomorrow. He had trained for months, but training and real combat were different things. These aliens had evolved on worlds with different gravity, different air, different dangers. They had natural abilities humans could only dream of. But humans had something too. The ability to adapt, to find solutions when none seemed possible, to keep fighting when everything said to give up. He thought about the colonies depending on him. Children who needed food. Families who had risked everything to build new lives among the stars. They were counting on him to bring home the resources they needed to survive. The tournament would begin with preliminary matches. Random selection would decide who fought whom. If he was lucky, he might avoid the most dangerous opponents until later rounds. If he was unlucky, he might face the Cathari champion in the first fight. Either way, he would be ready. He had to be. Too many people depended on it. Outside his window, the lights of Kepler Station continued their strange patterns. Tomorrow would bring combat unlike anything humans had ever seen. But tonight there was only waiting, and the weight of an entire species' hopes resting on one soldier's shoulders. The morning came too quickly. Dongsik woke to the sound of announcements echoing through the station. The tournament would begin in 2 hours. He ate a simple breakfast of earth food that tasted like cardboard in his dry mouth. Haiwan brought him reports she had gathered during the night. "I listened to alien communications," she said. "Most species think humans will lose in the first round. The betting pools give you 1 chance in 50. "Good," Dongsik said while checking his armor. "Let them underestimate us." The combat arena was a huge circular room with seats rising up on all sides. Thousands of aliens filled the stands. The floor was made of some kind of metal that could change shape. For each fight, it would become whatever terrain the computer selected. In the center stood the silver tree being from yesterday. Its voice filled the arena without effort. "The first preliminary match will be between the human warrior Dongsik Kim and the Bruthan champion Gorth." Dongsik felt his heart skip a beat. Of all the opponents he could face first, Gorth was one of the worst. The massive alien had natural advantages that seemed impossible to overcome. "Remember your training," Haiwan said as they walked toward the arena entrance. "Use his size against him. Stay mobile. Don't let him grab you." Dongsik nodded and stepped through the entrance tunnel. The roar of the crowd hit him like a physical force. Most of the noise sounded like cheering for Gorth. A few sections stayed quiet, probably species that had never seen humans fight. Gorth was already waiting in the center of the arena. In the bright lights, he looked even bigger than before. His gray hide was scarred from countless battles. Each of his forearms was thicker than Dongsik's entire body. The floor beneath their feet shifted and changed. Hills and valleys formed around them. Rocky outcrops rose from the ground. The computer had selected rough terrain that would make movement difficult. "Begin," announced the tree being. Gorth charged immediately. His massive feet pounded against the metal floor like thunder. Each step covered 3 meters of distance. He raised all forearms, intending to crush the human before the fight could really start. Dongsik waited until the last possible second, then dove to the side. Gorth's momentum carried him past, unable to stop or turn quickly. The human rolled to his feet and landed 3 quick strikes against the alien's back leg. His fists bounced off the thick hide like he was punching stone. Gorth spun around faster than something that big should be able to move. One massive hand swept through the air where Dongsik had been standing. The crowd roared approval. Most aliens had never seen a human move that quickly, but speed alone would not be enough. Dongsik needed to find a weakness. He circled around Gorth, staying just out of reach of those massive arms. The Bruthan tried to corner him against a rocky outcrop, but Dongsik scrambled up and over the artificial hill. Gorth followed, his greater strength allowing him to climb almost as fast. "Stand still and fight," Gorth bellowed. Stop running like a coward. Instead of answering, Dongsik picked up a loose rock and threw it at Gorth's face. The alien batted it away easily, but the distraction gave Dongsik time to study his opponent's movements. Gorth favored his left side slightly. One of his right arms moved a fraction slower than the others. An old injury perhaps, or just the way his species was built. It was not much, but it was something. The Bruthan charged again, this time trying to use two arms to block Dongsik's escape routes, while the other two reached for him. But the human had been watching and waiting for exactly this move. As Gorth's slower right arm swept toward him, Dongsik dropped low and grabbed the alien's wrist. Using Gorth's own forward momentum, he pulled and twisted, guiding the massive body off balance. Gorth stumbled but did not fall. He was too strong and too experienced for such a simple throw to work completely. But for a moment his weight was on his front foot. His center of gravity shifted forward. Dongsik stepped in and delivered a powerful kick to the side of Gorth's front knee. The joint bent sideways with a wet popping sound. The Bruthan roared in pain and surprise, dropping to one knee. Now Dongsik had the height advantage he needed. He jumped onto Gorth's back and wrapped his arms around the alien's thick neck. Gorth reached back with all four arms trying to grab him, but the human position made it difficult. "I will crush you," Gorth gasped, trying to shake Dongsik loose. "You have to catch me first," Dongsik replied. The Bruthan stood up despite his injured knee and ran backward toward a rocky wall, intending to crush Dongsik against it. At the last second, the human let go and dropped to the ground. Gorth slammed into the wall with tremendous force, stunning himself. Dongsik did not waste the opportunity. He grabbed Gorth's injured leg and twisted it further. The joint gave way completely with a sound like breaking wood. Gorth collapsed, unable to support his massive weight. The alien tried to continue fighting from the ground, swinging his massive arms in wide arcs, but Dongsik stayed behind him where the arms could not reach. He applied pressure to nerve points he had studied in human anatomy, hoping they worked the same way on alien bodies. After several long minutes, Gorth's movements became slower and weaker. The combination of pain, blood loss, and nerve pressure was taking its toll. Finally, the massive alien collapsed completely. "Victory to the human," announced the tree being. The arena fell silent. No one had expected this result. The betting pools had given Dongsik almost no chance of winning. Yet there he stood, barely breathing hard, while the supposedly superior alien warrior lay unconscious on the arena floor. Medical teams rushed in to treat Gorth. The Bruthan was not seriously hurt, but his knee would need time to heal. Dongsik offered his hand to help his defeated opponent sit up. "Good fight," Gorth said, accepting the gesture. "I underestimated you." "Most people do," Dongsik replied. "That's usually their mistake." As he left the arena, Dongsik could hear excited conversations in dozens of alien languages. HFY met him at the exit with a huge smile on her face. "The communications channels are going crazy," she reported. "Every species is asking for information about human fighting techniques. The odds on your next fight just changed dramatically." "What did you learn while I was fighting?" Dongsik asked. "A lot," HFY said, her expression becoming serious. "The Cathari have been manipulating tournament results for decades. They use their victories to control trade routes and resources, and their current champion has abilities that should not be possible." They walked back toward their quarters, passing groups of alien spectators who stared at Dongsik with new respect. Some whispered among themselves. Others took pictures with devices he did not recognize. "There's more," HFY continued. "I intercepted communications from the Cathari delegation. They're concerned about your victory. They had expected all preliminary matches to go according to their predictions." "Good," Dongsik said. "Worried enemies make mistakes." That evening, Ambassador Jinho Lee visited their quarters. The diplomatic representative looked tired and stressed. "Congratulations on your victory," he said. "But I need you to understand what's at stake here. Our colonies on Kepler 442b and TRAPPIST-1e are running out of food. The growing season failed on both worlds. Without new trade agreements, we'll lose those settlements within 6 months." "How many people?" Dongsik asked. 2 million colonists, mostly families who risked everything to build new lives. Jinho's voice was heavy with responsibility. "If you can win this tournament, we gain access to agricultural worlds that could supply all our colonies for decades." Dongsik nodded. He had known the stakes were high, but putting numbers to it made the weight heavier. 2 million lives depended on his ability to defeat opponents with natural advantages humans had never evolved to face. "I'll do everything I can," he promised. "I know you will," Jinho replied. "Earth believes in you." After the ambassador left, Dong-sik sat quietly in his quarters thinking about the day's events. He had won his first match through careful observation and tactical thinking. But future opponents would be ready for human unpredictability. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Stronger opponents who had learned from watching his fight with Gorth. The path to victory was getting harder with each round. But for tonight, he had proven something important. Humans belonged in this tournament. They could compete with species that had evolved under alien skies. The real test was still to come. 3 days passed. Dong-sik won 2 more preliminary matches using speed and tactics against stronger opponents. Each victory surprised the alien observers more than the last. The human was becoming famous across the station, but not everyone was happy about it. Dr. So-young Choi arrived on a supply ship from Earth. She was a specialist in alien biology, sent to study the other tournament fighters. Her job was to find weaknesses that Dong-sik could use in future matches. "I've been watching recordings of all the fights," she told Dong-sik and Haiwan in their quarters. "Most species rely on natural advantages. Strength, speed, armor, poison. But the Kethari are different." She showed them video footage on her tablet. The images were hard to focus on. The Kethari warrior moved like smoke, appearing and disappearing in ways that hurt to watch. "This is Veltar, their champion," So-young explained. "He's won every match in less than 30 seconds. But watch this part carefully." She slowed the video down frame by frame. In one image, Veltar was across the arena from his opponent. In the next frame, he was directly behind the enemy warrior. There were no frames showing movement between those positions. "That should be impossible," Haiwan said. "Even with advanced technology, matter can't teleport instantly." "That's what I thought too," So-young replied. "But I found something else." She switched to a different video. This one showed Veltar's semi-final match against a champion of the Sithka people. The reptilian alien was 3 meters tall with natural armor that could stop energy weapons. The match began normally. The Sithka warrior took a defensive position, knowing the Kethari reputation for speed. Veltar circled slowly, looking for an opening. Then everything changed in an instant. Veltar stepped backward into a shadow cast by an arena light. Instead of stopping when he hit the wall, he seemed to sink into the darkness like it was water. The shadow rippled around him. A second later, he emerged from a different shadow directly behind the Sithka champion. His hand touched the alien's back for just a moment. The reptilian warrior collapsed immediately, his eyes going dark. Medical teams rushed into the arena, but there was nothing they could do. The Sithka was dead, though no one could explain how. "The official cause of death was heart failure," So-young said. "But I got access to the medical scans. The Sithka had 3 hearts, and all of them stopped at exactly the same moment." Dong-sik studied the video carefully. "Play it again. Slower this time." So-young ran the footage at the slowest speed possible. Frame by frame, they watched Veltar disappear into one shadow and emerge from another. The movement looked supernatural, but Dong-sik had been a soldier long enough to know that everything had an explanation. "There," he said, pointing at the screen, right before he steps into the shadow. "Do you see that shimmer around his body?" So-young looked closer. There was indeed a brief distortion in the air around Veltar, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. "Technology," Haiwan said. "He's using some kind of device, but what kind?" So-young asked. "Our sensors can't detect anything artificial about the Kethari bodies. They appear to be completely natural." Over the next 2 days, they studied every available recording of Kethari matches. The pattern was always the same. Veltar would use shadow stepping to get close to his opponent, then kill with a single touch. No weapons, no visible violence, just instant death. Meanwhile, the tournament continued. Dong-sik advanced to the quarterfinals by defeating a warrior from the crystalline Vorthak people. The alien's diamond-hard skin had seemed impossible to penetrate, but Dong-sik found that the joints between crystal plates were vulnerable to precise strikes. The victory earned him respect from species that had previously ignored humans. Several alien delegations approached Ambassador Jinho Lee with preliminary trade offers. Even reaching the semi-finals would give Earth significant diplomatic advantages, but everyone knew the real test would come if Dong-sik faced Veltar in the finals. The night before the semi-final matches, So Young made a breakthrough. She had been analyzing the medical scans of Veltar's previous opponents, looking for clues about how they had died. "I found something," she said excitedly. "All the victims show the same pattern. Their nervous systems shut down simultaneously, as if something drained all the electrical activity from their bodies." "Life force," Haywan said quietly. "The rumors were true. He can drain life energy." "Not exactly," So Young corrected. "I think it's more scientific than that. Some kind of electromagnetic pulse delivered through direct contact. It would explain the instant death and the lack of physical damage." Dongsik was quiet for a long moment. "Can human bodies resist electromagnetic pulses?" "To some degree," So Young replied. "Our nervous systems are more redundant than most alien species. We might survive a pulse that would kill other beings instantly, but I can't guarantee it." The semi-final matches were scheduled for the next day. Dongsik would face a champion of the gas giant-dwelling Nethys, while Veltar was matched against a warrior from the insectoid Chithan species. The arena was packed beyond capacity. Word of the humans' surprising victories had spread throughout the station. Many aliens wanted to see if this strange species could continue their impossible winning streak. Dongsik's match came first. The Nethys warrior could manipulate gravity, making himself lighter or heavier at will. He could also create gravity fields that pulled objects toward him or pushed them away. The fight was difficult. Every time Dongsik tried to close distance, the alien would increase gravity around him, making movement nearly impossible. When he tried to retreat, reversed gravity would pull him forward into striking range. But humans had spent centuries fighting in different gravitational environments. Dongsik had trained on Mars where gravity was weaker, and on rotating space stations where artificial gravity changed with position. He learned to use the Nethys warrior's own gravity manipulation against him. When the alien created a high-gravity field to trap him, Dongsik would position himself so the field also affected his opponent. The Nethys found it harder to move when his own weight was tripled. After a long, exhausting fight, Dongsik managed to get close enough for a decisive strike. The Nethys warrior yielded rather than risk serious injury. Then came Veltar's match. The Chithan champion was prepared for shadow stepping. He carried special lights that eliminated most shadows in his immediate area. His natural armor was thicker than previous opponents, and his speed was impressive even by alien standards. None of it mattered. Veltar stepped into a shadow that should have been too small to hide him. The darkness seemed to expand around him like living liquid. When he emerged behind the Chithan warrior, his movement was so fast that the arena cameras could barely track it. The touch lasted less than a second. The Chithan warrior's nervous system shut down instantly, his body crashing to the arena floor with a sound like falling metal. The crowd was silent. Even aliens who had seen Veltar fight before were disturbed by the casual ease of the kill. As medical teams confirmed the Chithan's death, Veltar looked directly at Dongsik in the spectator area. The Cathari warrior's face was hidden behind a mask that seemed to absorb light, but his meaning was clear. Tomorrow they would face each other in the final match, and tomorrow the human would die just as easily as all the others. Dongsik met that hidden gaze without flinching. He had come too far and risked too much to be intimidated now. 2 million colonists were counting on him. Earth's future in the galaxy depended on what happened in that arena. The final match would determine everything. The final match was set for the next day. Dongsik spent the night studying everything they knew about Veltar. The Cathari champion had never been pushed to fight longer than 30 seconds. No opponent had ever survived his touch. The aliens called him the Shadow of Death. So Young worked through the night analyzing every frame of video they had. "I think I understand how the shadow stepping works," she said as dawn approached. "He's not really teleporting. He's moving through some kind of dimensional fold in spacetime. Can you explain that in simple terms?" Dongsik asked. "Imagine space is like a piece of paper," she said. "Most of us have to walk across the surface to get from one point to another. But Veltar can fold the paper so two distant points touch, then step between them instantly. How do we stop something like that?" Haywan wondered. "We can't," So Young admitted. "The technology is beyond anything humans have developed. But there might be limitations we can exploit." She showed them her analysis. Every time Veltar shadow steps, there's a brief energy signature. The dimensional fold takes time to form and collapse. We're talking about microseconds, but it's not truly instantaneous. Dongsik nodded slowly. So there's a moment when he's vulnerable. Maybe. When he's between dimensions, his physical form has to transition from folded space back to normal space. During that transition, he might not be able to phase through solid objects. It was not much of an advantage, but it was something. Dong-sik would have to time his attacks perfectly, hitting Veltar in the split second when the alien materialized from shadow stepping. The arena was fuller than ever for the final match. Representatives from every major species in the galaxy had come to watch. Many expected to see the human warrior die in spectacular fashion. A few hoped he might somehow find a way to win. The betting pools had shifted dramatically since Dong-sik's first victory, but Veltar was still the overwhelming favorite. The Kithari had dominated this tournament for 3 cycles. Their champion had never been defeated. Ambassador Jin-Ho Lee visited Dong-sik before the match. "Whatever happens today, you've already done more than anyone expected," he said. "Earth is proud of you." "It's not enough," Dong-sik replied. "Those colonists need the resources this tournament provides. I have to win." The arena floor had been reconfigured for the final match. Areas of artificial darkness were scattered throughout the space, giving Veltar multiple shadow-stepping points. It seemed designed to give the Kithari champion every possible advantage. Dong-sik entered the arena wearing his best armor, though he knew it would not protect him from Veltar's death touch. The crowd's roar was deafening, but most of the noise was not for him. Veltar emerged from the opposite entrance like a piece of living shadow. He moved with fluid grace that suggested perfect control over every muscle. The mask covering his face reflected no light, making it impossible to see his features. "The final match begins now," announced the silver tree being. "Victory determines control of the Kepler trade routes and access to the agricultural worlds of the Centauri sector." Dong-sik took a defensive position near the center of the arena. He wanted to force Veltar to come to him, to control the pace of the fight for as long as possible. Veltar circled slowly, studying his opponent. This was the first time he had faced a human in combat. He had expected the alien to show fear, but Dong-sik's heartbeat remained steady, his breathing controlled. Without warning, Veltar stepped backward into a shadow. The darkness rippled around him like water, then went still. Dong-sik spun in a circle, trying to watch all the shadows at once. The attack came from above. Veltar emerged from the shadow cast by an overhead light, dropping toward Dong-sik with claws extended. The human dove sideways, but not quite fast enough. Razor-sharp talons raked across his armored shoulder, leaving deep gouges in the reinforced material. Dong-sik rolled to his feet and backed away, blood seeping from cuts on his arm. The first exchange had shown him just how fast his opponent really was. Veltar's movements were beyond human reflexes. The Kithari champion did not press his advantage immediately. He seemed curious about this opponent who had survived the first attack. Most warriors were dead or paralyzed with fear by now. Veltar shadow-stepped again, this time emerging from Dong-sik's left side. His clawed hand swept toward the human's head in a strike that would have removed it completely. Dong-sik ducked under the attack and threw a counterpunch, but his fist passed through empty air as Veltar stepped back into shadow. The pattern continued for several minutes. Veltar would attack from impossible angles, inflict damage, then retreat before Dong-sik could respond effectively. The human's armor was being shredded piece by piece. Blood ran from dozens of cuts, but something strange was happening. Instead of weakening, Dong-sik seemed to be adapting to his opponent's tactics. His movements became more precise. His reaction time improved despite his injuries. Veltar noticed the change too. The human was studying him, learning from each exchange. This had never happened before. Previous opponents either died quickly or became too frightened to think clearly. Frustrated, Veltar abandoned his cautious approach. He began shadow-stepping rapidly, attacking from multiple angles in quick succession. Claws raked across Dong-sik's back, opening wounds that sprayed blood across the arena floor. The crowd gasped as the human staggered, but remained standing. No alien warrior had ever survived this level of damage from a Kithari champion. Dong-sik wiped blood from his eyes and continued moving. His vision was blurring, but his mind remained sharp. He was beginning to see patterns in Veltar's attacks. The shadow-stepping was not random. There were preferred angles, timing sequences that repeated. Veltar emerged from shadow directly in front of Dong-sik, close enough for the death touch. His hand shot forward toward the human's chest. But Dongsik twisted aside at the last instant. Instead of a solid hit to the heart, Veltar's fingers only grazed the human's ribs. The electromagnetic pulse discharged through the brief contact. Dongsik's nervous system seized, muscles locking in painful spasms. But the reduced contact area meant the pulse was not strong enough to cause instant death. Dongsik collapsed to his knees, body shaking from electrical trauma. But after a few seconds, his nervous system began to recover. Human biology was more resilient than Veltar had expected. The Cathari champion stepped back, confused. His death touch had never failed before. The human should be dead, but instead was struggling back to his feet. Impossible. Veltar hissed in a voice like grinding metal. "You're not the first one to say that," Dongsik replied through gritted teeth. The human's refusal to die was beginning to disturb Veltar. He had killed hundreds of opponents over the years. Fear and death were tools he understood completely. But this alien seemed to grow stronger as the fight continued. Veltar shadow-stepped again, but this time Dongsik was ready. As the Cathari emerged from darkness, the human was already moving. He could not match Veltar's speed, but he no longer needed to. He was predicting where the attacks would come from. Dongsik's fist connected with Veltar's wrist as the alien tried to rake his claws across the human's throat. The impact sent shockwaves through both fighters. Veltar's arm went numb from the unexpected counterattack. For the first time in the match, the Cathari champion took a full step backward. The crowd erupted in amazement. No one had ever seen Veltar forced to retreat from an opponent. The impossible was happening before their eyes, but Dongsik was running out of time. Blood loss was making him weak. His movements were becoming slower despite his determination to continue fighting. Veltar seemed to sense this too. He began moving more aggressively, pressing his advantages while the human was still capable of resistance. Shadow step after shadow step, strike after strike, slowly wearing down his stubborn opponent. Dongsik defended desperately, but each exchange cost him more energy. His armor was completely destroyed now, hanging in tatters that provided no protection. Deep cuts covered his arms and torso, yet still he fought. Still he studied Veltar's movements. Still he looked for the opening that would let him strike back. The human's refusal to surrender was beginning to anger Veltar. This should have been a simple execution, like all his previous matches. Instead, he was being forced to work harder than he had in years. The Cathari champion decided to end the fight with overwhelming force. He shadow-stepped rapidly between multiple positions, building momentum for a final devastating attack. As Veltar prepared to emerge for the killing blow, Dongsik made his decision. He had been counting heartbeats, measuring time intervals, calculating probabilities. There was one pattern he had noticed, one moment of vulnerability. Everything would depend on perfect timing and a little bit of luck. The moment arrived. Veltar stepped into shadow for what he intended to be the final time. Dongsik turned toward where instinct told him the Cathari would emerge, and waited for the split second that would determine the fate of 2 million human colonists. Time seemed to slow as Dongsik watched the shadow where Veltar had vanished. His body was broken and bleeding, but his mind was perfectly clear. Everything depended on the next few seconds. He had been watching Veltar shadow-stepping throughout the fight. Each time the Cathari emerged from darkness, there was a pattern, a rhythm. The alien always took exactly 1.7 seconds to travel through folded space, regardless of the distance. Dongsik had been counting. 1 heartbeat, 2 heartbeats. The moment was approaching when Veltar would materialize behind him for the killing strike. But the human had also noticed something else. When Veltar emerged from shadow-stepping, his molecular structure took a fraction of a second to fully solidify. During that brief instant, the alien's enhanced body was vulnerable in ways it never was during normal movement. Seconds had passed. Dongsik began to turn, bringing his right arm up in what would look like a desperate defensive gesture. But he was not trying to block an attack. He was aiming for a specific point in space where he calculated Veltar's head would be. 7 seconds. Veltar began to materialize directly behind Dongsik, just as the human had predicted. The Cathari champion was confident this would be the final exchange. His clawed hand was already extending toward the human's neck, ready to deliver the death touch that would end the fight. But Veltar had made a crucial error. His overconfidence had led him to use the same emergence angle he had favored throughout the match. the pattern that Dongsik had been studying and memorizing with each painful exchange. As Veltar's form began to solidify from shadow, Dongsik completed his turn and delivered a backhand slap with all the force his injured body could generate. The timing was perfect. Dongsik's hand connected with the side of Veltar's head at the precise instant the alien's molecular structure was transitioning from shadow form to solid matter. The nanotechnology that made shadow stepping possible was still active, trying to complete the materialization process. The impact hit Veltar's skull during the most vulnerable nanosecond of the entire shadow stepping cycle. His enhanced bone structure, designed to resist energy weapons and piercing attacks, could not distribute the blunt force trauma across surfaces that were still partially folded in spacetime. The force of the blow was magnified by Veltar's own momentum as he emerged from shadow. The alien had been moving at maximum speed, intending to strike before the human could react. Instead, his velocity added to the impact that struck his head. Dongsik had put everything into that single strike. All his remaining strength, all his knowledge of human anatomy and leverage, all his desperation to save the colonists depending on him. The backhand slap contained the rotational power of his entire body, focused through his hand into an area no larger than his palm. Enhanced by adrenaline and delivered with the precision of a trained soldier who had spent years perfecting close combat techniques. But it was still just a slap. Against a fully materialized opponent with enhanced biology, it would have been nothing more than an insult. Against an alien whose molecular structure was locked in the transition phase of shadow stepping, it became something else entirely. Veltar's skull exploded. The enhanced bone structure that had protected him through hundreds of battles shattered like glass under the perfectly timed impact. Fragments of alien bone and synthetic material scattered across the arena in a spray of dark blood. The Cathari champion's body collapsed instantly, his nervous system destroyed along with the brain that controlled it. The nanotechnology that enabled shadow stepping sparked and died, releasing small bursts of energy as it shut down permanently. The arena fell completely silent. 50,000 alien spectators stared in shock at what they had just witnessed. The invincible Veltar, terror of the galaxy, champion of 3 consecutive tournaments, lay dead on the arena floor, killed by what appeared to be a casual, dismissive gesture from a bleeding human warrior. Dongsik stood over his fallen opponent, breathing heavily. Blood dripped from his wounds onto the metal floor. His armor was destroyed. His body pushed far beyond normal human limits, but he was alive, and Veltar was not. The silver tree being that served as referee seemed stunned into silence. It took several long moments before it could speak. Victory to the human warrior Dongsik Kim, it finally announced. The announcement triggered an explosion of noise from the crowd. Some aliens cheered in amazement. Others sat in stunned silence, unable to process what they had seen. A few began arguing among themselves about whether the result was even possible. Medical teams rushed onto the arena floor, but there was nothing they could do for Veltar. The Cathari champion was dead, his enhanced skull scattered in pieces that sparkled with dying nanotechnology. Other medics surrounded Dongsik, checking his injuries and applying emergency treatment. He had lost a dangerous amount of blood and suffered electrical trauma from Veltar's death touch, but he would survive. As they helped him from the arena, Dongsik looked back once at Veltar's body. The alien who had seemed invincible just minutes ago now looked small and broken on the cold metal floor. "How?" asked one of the alien medics treating his wounds. "How did you know where he would appear?" "I watched," Dongsik replied simply. "I learned. Then I got lucky, but it had been more than luck. It had been careful observation, tactical thinking, and the uniquely human ability to adapt under extreme pressure. Most species would have been paralyzed by fear when facing an opponent like Veltar. Humans were different. They found ways to keep fighting even when victory seemed impossible." In the medical bay, So Young and Haiwan waited with enormous smiles on their faces. Ambassador Jin-Ho Lee was there too, along with communication devices already buzzing with messages from Earth. "The entire galaxy is talking about what just happened," Jin-Ho reported. "Every news network, every government, every trade organization. You didn't just win a tournament. You changed the balance of power in known space." "The colonists?" Dongsik asked weakly from the medical bed. We'll have all the resources they need, Jinho assured him. The Kepler trade routes are now open to human commerce. Agricultural contracts from a dozen worlds. Our people will not just survive, they will thrive. So Young was studying readings from her medical scanner. The strike you delivered was perfect, she said with professional admiration. You hit him at exactly the right moment with exactly the right force. The probability of success was less than 1%. Sometimes 1% is enough, Dongsik replied. Over the following hours, the full impact of Veltar's defeat became clear. The Kithari delegation had already left the station. Their plans for continued domination shattered along with their champion's skull. Other species that had been intimidated into submission for decades were beginning to speak openly about Kithari crimes. But the most important result was simpler. 2 million human colonists would live. Earth had a place in the galactic community, and one soldier had proven that humans could achieve the impossible when everything depended on victory. Dongsik closed his eyes and rested, knowing his job was done. The slap that had seemed so simple to observers had been the culmination of everything he had learned as a soldier. Everything he understood about combat, and everything he was willing to risk for his people. It had been enough. The news of Veltar's death spread across the galaxy faster than light-speed communication could carry it. Within hours, every major world knew that the Kithari champion had fallen to a human warrior. The impossible had happened at Kepler Station. Dongsik spent 3 days in the medical bay recovering from his injuries. His body was healing well, but the doctors wanted to monitor him for any delayed effects from Veltar's electromagnetic attack. So far, his nervous system showed no permanent damage. On the 4th day, he received an unexpected visitor. An alien he had never seen before entered the medical bay. It was roughly humanoid, but with silver skin that seemed to shift and change like liquid metal. I am Investigator Keffel of the Galactic Justice Council, the being said in perfect English. I need to speak with you about your victory over Veltar. Dongsik sat up in his medical bed. What kind of investigation? The kind that determines whether the Kithari should be tried for crimes against the galaxy. Keffel replied. Your victory has given us the opportunity to examine Veltar's remains. What we found changes everything. The investigator activated a holographic display that showed detailed scans of the dead Kithari champion. The images revealed a body that was more machine than natural organism. Veltar was not born this way, Keffel explained. Over 90% of his internal structure had been replaced with stolen technology. Neural implants from the Nethys people, bone density enhancers from the Vorthak, muscle fiber improvements from a dozen different species. Dongsik studied the scans with growing understanding. They were stealing from everyone they defeated. Exactly. Each tournament victory gave them access to new biological samples. They would study the defeated warriors, then integrate the best features into their own champions. Veltar was a collection of advantages stolen from hundreds of species over centuries. The hologram showed more details. Veltar's claws had been artificially enhanced with poison glands from an extinct species. His shadow-stepping ability came from dimensional technology taken from beings who had been wiped out generations ago. The death touch? Dongsik asked. Bioelectric manipulation stolen from the Zephyrians, Keffel replied. The Kithari hunted that species to extinction specifically to acquire their natural abilities. The implications were staggering. The Kithari had not won their tournaments through superior evolution or training. They had cheated on a galactic scale, committing genocide to steal the abilities of other species. Why are you telling me this? Dongsik asked. Because your victory exposed their crimes, Keffel said. When Veltar died, all his stolen technology shut down at once. Our forensic teams could finally scan his body without interference. We now have evidence of what the Kithari have been doing for the past 1,000 years. Over the following days, the investigation results were released to the public. The reaction was explosive. Species that had submitted to Kithari demands rather than face their champions learned that their people had been murdered for biological research. The Kithari government tried to deny the accusations, but the evidence was overwhelming. Veltar's body contained genetic material from dozens of supposedly extinct species. The technology in his organs matched devices stolen from defeated civilizations. Within a week, the Galactic Justice Council issued warrants for every member of the Kithari leadership. Their territories were placed under sanctions. Their trade routes were redistributed to species they had previously oppressed. But the most satisfying result came from closer to home. Ambassador Jin Ho Lee visited Dong-sik on his last day in the medical bay. The diplomat was carrying a tablet filled with reports from Earth's colonies. The first shipments arrived yesterday, he announced with a huge smile. Food, medical supplies, construction materials. Everything our people need to not just survive but expand. The agricultural contracts? Dong-sik asked, signed and confirmed. 12 different worlds are competing to supply our colonies. We went from desperate shortage to abundance overnight. Jin-ho paused. 2 million people owe their lives to what you did in that arena. The numbers were hard to process. Dong-sik had been focused on winning individual fights, not saving entire populations. But every tactical decision, every moment of endurance, every calculated risk had contributed to this result. There's more, Jin-ho continued. The Galactic Council has invited Earth to join as a full member. We're being offered representation in galactic government, access to advanced technologies, and protection under interstellar law. It was more than humanity had dared hope for when they first ventured beyond their home system. In a matter of weeks, Earth had gone from an unknown curiosity to a respected member of galactic civilization. So Young entered the medical bay carrying her research equipment. She had been studying the remains of Veltar's technology, trying to understand how the shadow stepping had worked. I finished my analysis, she reported. The dimensional folding technology was incredibly advanced, but it had a fatal flaw. She showed them her findings on a portable display. The transition phase between dimensions created a resonance cascade in the alien's molecular structure. During that brief moment, any kinetic impact would be amplified exponentially. In simple terms, Dong-sik asked. You hit him when he was most vulnerable to physical force. The timing had to be perfect down to the nanosecond. But the result was inevitable. Physics did the rest. It confirmed what Dong-sik had suspected. His victory had not been pure luck. It had been the result of careful observation, tactical thinking, and precise execution under impossible pressure. The really interesting part, So Young continued, is that this vulnerability was built into the technology itself. The original creators of dimensional folding must have included it as a safety feature. Heywan looked up from her own reports, a way to kill their own warriors if they ever turned against their creators. Exactly. The Cathari stole the technology but never understood the safeguards. They thought they were invincible, but they were using weapons designed to have weaknesses. The irony was perfect. The Cathari had defeated themselves by relying on stolen technology they did not fully comprehend. Their arrogance had made them vulnerable to an opponent who understood that every system had flaws. On his final day at Kepler Station, Dong-sik was invited to address the Galactic Council. Representatives from hundreds of species gathered to hear from the human who had changed the balance of power in known space. The speech was simple and brief. Dong-sik was a soldier, not a diplomat. He spoke about duty, sacrifice, and the responsibility that came with strength. He emphasized that humanity wanted partnership, not domination, but the most important message was unspoken. Every species in the galaxy now knew that humans could adapt, endure, and find victory even when facing impossible odds. That knowledge would shape how aliens viewed humanity for generations to come. The transport ship back to Earth was comfortable and well supplied. Dong-sik spent most of the journey sleeping, letting his body finish healing from the tournament injuries. When he was awake, he read reports about the changes his victory had triggered across the galaxy. Smaller species were forming new alliances, no longer afraid of Cathari retaliation. Trade routes that had been monopolized for centuries were opening to competitive bidding. Technologies that had been hoarded were being shared for the benefit of all. It was exactly what the tournament had been designed to achieve, back when it was first created as an alternative to galactic war. Single combat between champions, with the results determining policy for entire civilizations. The system had been corrupted by Cathari cheating, but Dong-sik's victory had restored its original purpose. Conflicts would once again be settled by the skill and courage of individual warriors, rather than the threat of genocide. When Earth finally appeared in the viewport, Dong-sik felt a profound sense of relief. He had completed his mission. The colonists were safe. Humanity had a secure place in the galactic community. The victory celebration was modest by galactic standards, but it felt right for a species that valued substance over spectacle. Government officials made speeches about humanity's bright future among the stars. Military leaders praised tactical innovation and adaptive thinking. But the moment that mattered most came when Dong-Sik received a simple message from the colonies he had fought to save. 2 million people sending their thanks to the soldier who had slapped an alien warrior and changed the fate of worlds. Months later, new reports arrived from the edge of known space. Long-range sensors had detected artificial signals from beyond the galactic rim. Something was out there, something that had been watching and waiting. The Galactic Council was preparing first contact protocols for whatever they might encounter. And they had specifically requested that humans take the lead in any negotiations, not because humanity was the strongest species in the galaxy, not because they had the most advanced technology or the largest military, but because they had proven capable of achieving the impossible when everything depended on victory. Captain Dong-Sik Kim received the orders with quiet satisfaction. Whatever waited beyond the rim of known space, humanity would face it the same way they faced every challenge, with courage, determination, and the knowledge that sometimes the most powerful blow was the one nobody saw coming. The slap that shattered Veltar's skull had become legend across 1,000 worlds. But for the humans preparing to meet the unknown, it was simply proof that adaptation and persistence could overcome any obstacle, even the impossible ones. 1 year after the tournament, Captain Dong-Sik Kim stood on the observation deck of the New Earth Embassy on Kepler Station. The same station where he had faced impossible odds now served as humanity's diplomatic center for the entire galaxy. The changes had been remarkable. Where once the corridors echoed with whispers about Cathari dominance, now they buzzed with discussions of fair trade and cooperative exploration. The shadow of fear that had hung over smaller species for centuries had been lifted by a single, perfectly timed slap. Ambassador Jin-Ho Lee joined him at the viewport. The diplomat looked tired but satisfied. Negotiating humanity's integration into galactic society had been exhausting work, but the results spoke for themselves. The latest reports from the colonies, Jin-Ho said, handing Dong-Sik a tablet. Population growth is exceeding all projections. We're receiving requests to establish settlements on 47 different worlds. Dong-Sik scrolled through the data. The numbers were impressive, but they represented something more important than statistics. They represented human families who would grow up among the stars, children who would never know the fear of starvation that had threatened the original colonists. Any word from the Outer Rim? Dong-Sik asked. The exploration fleets made contact 3 weeks ago, Jin-Ho replied. It's complicated. The signals from beyond known space had turned out to be from another galaxy entirely, an ancient civilization that had been observing the local galactic group for millennia, waiting for the right moment to make contact. They had been waiting for a species that could prove itself capable of solving problems without resorting to genocide or technological supremacy. The defeat of Veltar had been exactly the demonstration they were looking for. They want to meet with you specifically, Jin-Ho continued. The being who showed that violence could be ended with precision rather than overwhelming force. It was a strange irony. Dong-Sik's most famous victory had come from a single strike delivered in desperate circumstances. But that moment had somehow convinced an extragalactic civilization that humanity was worth talking to. Dr. So-Young Choi approached them carrying her latest research findings. She had spent the past year studying the technology recovered from Veltar's body, working with teams of alien scientists to understand what the Cathari had stolen. We've made a breakthrough, she announced excitedly. The dimensional folding technology can be modified to create stable space-time bridges, not for combat but for transportation and communication across vast distances. The implications were staggering. Faster-than-light travel had always been limited by energy requirements and navigational hazards, but dimensional bridges could connect distant points in space without the usual limitations. The galaxy could be completely connected, So-Young continued. Travel times measured in hours instead of years. Real-time communication between any 2 points in known space. It was the kind of technological revolution that reshaped entire civilizations, and it had only become possible because Dong-Sik had defeated the alien, who hoarded such innovations for his own species. Lieutenant Haywan Park, now promoted to major, arrived with security briefings from across the galaxy. Her intelligence work had become crucial as humanity took on greater responsibilities in galactic affairs. The Cathari remnants are still causing problems, she reported. Small groups that refuse to accept their government's surrender. They're forming terrorist cells on the outer worlds. How dangerous are they? Dongsik asked. Less than they used to be. Without access to stolen technology, they're just another species with grievances, but they blame you personally for destroying their empire. It was an expected consequence. Veltar's defeat had dismantled a power structure that had existed for centuries. Those who had benefited from Cathari dominance would not give up easily. There's also positive news, Haywan continued. 17 species that were thought extinct have been found in hidden refuges. They went into hiding when the Cathari started their genetic harvesting programs. The return of supposedly lost civilizations was one of the most wonderful results of the investigation into Cathari crimes. Entire cultures were emerging from centuries of hiding, ready to rejoin galactic society. As they talked, an announcement echoed through the embassy. A ship from Earth had arrived carrying new colonists and supplies. The steady stream of humans expanding into the galaxy showed no signs of slowing. Dongsik watched through the viewport as the transport ship docked. Families emerged carrying everything they owned, ready to start new lives on worlds they had only heard about in stories. Children pressed their faces against windows, staring in wonder at the alien architecture surrounding them. Do you ever regret it? Jinho asked quietly. The burden of being responsible for all this change? Dongsik considered the question carefully. His single moment of desperate action had altered the fate of trillions of beings across the galaxy. Species that had lived in fear were now free. Humanity had gained resources and opportunities beyond their wildest dreams. But with those benefits came responsibility. Earth was now expected to help maintain galactic peace. Human explorers were pushing into dangerous regions of space. The next crisis might require even greater sacrifices. No, he said finally. I did what any soldier would do. I protected my people. But you did more than that, So Young said. You proved that impossible problems can have simple solutions. That sometimes the most advanced technology can be defeated by basic physics and perfect timing. The statement had become something of a motto among human scientists and military strategists. Advanced did not always mean better. Complexity could create vulnerabilities that simplicity could exploit. It was a lesson the galaxy was still learning. A communication alert chimed on Jinho's tablet. The message was from the Galactic Council, marked with the highest priority coding. The extragalactic contact wants to schedule a formal meeting, Jinho announced after reading the message. They're proposing a location at the edge of known space, neutral territory, where both civilizations can meet safely. When? Dongsik asked. 6 months from now. They want time to prepare translation protocols and cultural exchange guidelines. Jinho paused. They specifically requested that you lead the human delegation. It would be the most important diplomatic mission in human history. First contact with a civilization that had observed galactic development for millions of years. The decisions made in that meeting could determine humanity's role in a much larger universe. I'll need a good team, Dongsik said. Already being assembled, Haywan replied. Scientists, diplomats, cultural specialists, the best minds Earth has to offer. And soldiers? Dongsik asked. A small security detail, but the extragalactic civilization has made it clear they prefer negotiation to intimidation. They were impressed by how you defeated Veltar without using superior technology or overwhelming force. The irony was not lost on any of them. Dongsik's most famous victory had come from a desperate slap, delivered in the final seconds of a brutal fight. Yet that simple action had somehow convinced an ancient civilization that humans were worth meeting. As the day ended, Dongsik returned to his quarters in the embassy. The room was comfortable but modest, decorated with a few personal items from Earth and some alien artifacts he had collected during his travels. On his desk sat a small piece of metal that looked like ordinary steel. It was actually a fragment of Veltar's skull, recovered from the arena floor after the fatal fight. So Young had offered to analyze it for him, but Dongsik had declined. He kept it not as a trophy, but as a reminder that every action had consequences, that a single moment of courage or desperation could change the fate of worlds. The fragment also reminded him that victory was never guaranteed. He had defeated Veltar through careful observation, tactical thinking, and incredible luck. The next challenge might not offer the same opportunities, but humans had proven something important at Kepler Station. They could adapt. They could endure. They could find solutions when none seemed possible. Whatever waited in the dark between galaxies, humanity would face it the same way Dongsik had faced Veltar. With courage, determination, and the knowledge that sometimes the most powerful weapons were the ones nobody expected. The slap that shattered an alien skull had become legend. But the real victory was what came after. Peace instead of domination, cooperation instead of conquest. A galaxy where strength was measured by what you protected, not what you destroyed. It was a legacy worth fighting for. And if necessary, it was a legacy worth dying for. But Dongsik hoped it would not come to that. Humanity had proven their point. Now it was time to see what they could build with the opportunities their courage had earned them. The stars waited. And for the first time in galactic history, they seemed to be smiling.